China has affirmed Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy use, which is in line with international non-proliferation agreements, and warned against force, sanctions, and escalation, according to reporting on a meeting between senior Chinese and Iranian diplomats. The statement came as tensions between Iran and the United States remain high and talks in Oman approach. Chinese officials have reiterated their commitment to helping resolve the Iranian nuclear issue diplomatically, according to the reporting. The meeting represents direct diplomatic engagement between Beijing and Tehran during a critical period. Separately, Lavrov emphasized the high risks of escalation between the US and Iran, warning that the region faces what he described as dangers waiting to be triggered by a single misstep, according to his reported remarks. The statements from both Beijing and Moscow signal that two permanent members of the UN Security Council are publicly positioning themselves against military escalation and in support of diplomatic resolution, a dynamic that affects the broader context in which US-Iran talks take place. China's message was direct, according to the reporting. Beijing affirmed Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy, a position consistent with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which recognizes the right of signatory states to peaceful nuclear technology. The warning against force, sanctions, and escalation positions China against the current US approach, which combines military deployment, economic pressure, and diplomatic engagement simultaneously. From Beijing's perspective, the coercive elements undermine rather than support diplomacy. China has significant economic interests tied to Iran, including energy trade and infrastructure partnerships. The Strait of Hormuz, through which substantial Chinese oil imports pass, would be directly affected by any military conflict. Beijing's diplomatic support for Tehran serves both principled and practical interests. The timing of the meeting, as US-Iran talks in Oman approach, suggests China is signaling to both sides that it remains engaged and invested in a diplomatic outcome. Whether Beijing's backing strengthens Iran's negotiating position or complicates the talks depends on how Washington interprets the signal. Lavrov's description of the situation was severe, highlighting the potential for conflict. Now, especially this situation is potentially explosive, not only for Iran itself, but for the entire Middle East. There are too many mines waiting to go off, just waiting for someone to tread on them, Lavrov said, according to the reported remarks. Moscow says it is not forcing itself as a middleman between Israel, Iran, or the United States, but is discussing the situation in its contacts with all parties, according to Lavrov's statement. Iran is our close partner and neighbor, and of course, we care about how things develop, he said. I think Israel, America, and Iran know that we are ready to contribute to solving the situation and to observing the agreements previously achieved, Lavrov said, according to the reporting. The reference to previously achieved agreements likely refers to earlier nuclear frameworks. Lavrov emphasized the high risks of escalation between the US and Iran, reflecting the gravity that Moscow assigns to the current moment. Whether this assessment is primarily analytical or intended to pressure the US toward restraint serves both purposes simultaneously. According to a New York Times report, Iran has agreed to discuss not only its nuclear program, but also its missile capabilities and its ties to militant groups, a key demand from Washington, according to the reporting. If confirmed, this would represent a significant shift from Iran's stated position. However, an Iranian official denied all reports, claiming the NYT and Al Jazeera have a biased agenda, according to the reporting. He added that there had been no change in Iran's position. The denial is direct and categorical. The truth of this claim remains unclear as reports diverge from Iran's public position. Either Iran has privately signaled flexibility that it publicly denies, which is common in diplomacy, or the reports are inaccurate. Both possibilities should be considered. The stakes of this dispute are high. If Iran has agreed to discuss missiles, the talks have a broader scope than Tehran publicly acknowledges. If the reports are wrong, they may be designed to create pressure or expectations that complicate Iran's negotiating position. The truth may not become clear until the talks actually begin. The talks set to take place in Oman came after what reporting describes as concessions on both sides. The United States has reportedly agreed to keep the negotiations limited in scope and free of regional involvement. Iran, in turn, has agreed to sit across the table from American officials, a step officials say was not guaranteed. This framing suggests both sides moved from their preferred positions. Washington apparently accepted narrower talks than it wanted, while Tehran agreed to direct engagement that it had previously conditioned on other factors. Reuters reports that negotiations in Oman will focus on Iran's nuclear program. Whether missiles are truly off the table, as Iran insists, or secretly on it, as the NYT suggests, represents the central ambiguity of the current moment. The Oman venue itself represents a compromise from the originally reported Istanbul format. The shift from multilateral to bilateral and from Turkey to Oman reflects Iran's preferences on format, according to previous reporting by Axios and Reuters. Russia's foreign ministry confirmed that it once offered Iran the option to export its enriched uranium stockpiles to Russian territory, and says that offer has not been withdrawn, according to the reported statement. Russia has stated that the decision remains with Tehran, but the outcome is yet to be determined. Russia once suggested to import uranium to Russia. The remnant uranium. Currently, this topic is still on the table, the spokesperson said, according to the reporting. But you need to take into account that these reserves belong to Iran. It does not contradict Iranian obligations about the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. It is up to the Iranians to decide whether to export it or not. We have always been committed to finding exclusively diplomatic and political solutions, the statement continued. We believe that any pressure exerted on Iran will not result in any positive solutions, and we hope that we will be able to avoid that, the spokesperson said, according to the reporting. The Russian position, keeping the offer open while respecting Iranian sovereignty over the decision, positions Moscow as a facilitator rather than a party imposing terms. This contrasts with the U.S. approach, which Iran characterizes as coercive. An advisor to Iran's supreme leader stressed the country's position on uranium, suggesting it could dilute rather than transfer the material, which has been a subject of negotiation. The statement directly addresses one of the key demands in the diplomatic process. My 60% can be brought down, for instance, to 20% through dilution. If you are concerned about the 60%, it is possible to dilute it. But this comes with a price, and that price must be fully paid, the advisor said, according to the reporting. This suggests Iran is offering an alternative to transfer, domestic dilution, while demanding reciprocal concessions. Iran has repeatedly stated it does not seek nuclear weapons, but this claim remains contentious among international actors. The advisor said the United States, must pay a price in return for this, according to the reporting. The formulation links Iran's nuclear restraint to U.S. concessions, a transaction rather than a unilateral demand. The advisor also stated that the entire discussion, the whole debate, is exclusively and solely and strictly with the United States of America, and exclusively focused on the nuclear issue, according to the reporting. This reinforces Iran's insistence on bilateral nuclear-only talks. The distinction between dilution and transfer is technically and politically significant. Transferring enriched uranium abroad removes it from Iranian territory entirely. Diluting it domestically reduces the enrichment level while keeping the material in Iran. From Iran's perspective, dilution preserves sovereignty. The material stays on Iranian soil under Iranian control, while addressing the international concern about highly enriched uranium that could theoretically be further enriched to weapons grade. From Washington's perspective, transfer abroad provides stronger assurance because the material is physically removed from Iran's control. The preference for transfer reflects lower trust in monitoring arrangements and concerns about reversibility. The advisor's framing, it is possible to dilute it, but this comes with a price, positions the concession as transactional rather than capitulatory. Iran is offering to address concerns about its enrichment levels, but demanding something in return. What that price entails was not specified in the reported remarks. An advisor to Khamenei stated that Iran sees any U.S. strike as involving Israel, suggesting joint retaliation, according to the reporting. Israel and America are not two, they are one, the advisor said. It is a completely false assumption to believe that America would launch an attack and Israel would not be involved. It is fundamentally wrong. If America initiates a strike, Israel will absolutely be a participant in that action. Therefore, it must also receive a response that is proportionate to its involvement, the advisor said, according to the reporting. This statement signals that Iran views any U.S. military action as a joint U.S.-Israeli operation and would respond accordingly, targeting both. The implication is that Israel cannot remain insulated from the consequences of a U.S. strike. The strategic significance is that this raises the cost calculation for military action. If attacking Iran means Israel faces retaliation regardless of its direct involvement, the consequences expand significantly. Whether this represents genuine operational planning or deterrence messaging cannot be determined from the statement alone. Senior Iranian lawmakers stated that the Islamic Republic will not retreat on uranium enrichment, its missile program, or its regional alliances, according to the reporting. They called these non-negotiable red lines and said American pressure has been exhausted. The characterization of U.S. pressure as exhausted suggests these lawmakers believe Washington has deployed its maximum leverage without achieving the desired results. Whether this assessment is accurate or represents domestic political messaging is open to interpretation. The stated positions, no concessions, no rollbacks, no recognition of Israel, represent the most hardline framing of Iran's negotiating position. Whether the actual negotiating team takes equally rigid positions at the table or whether public statements differ from private flexibility is the perennial question. The NYT report on potential missile discussions is at odds with public statements from Iranian lawmakers. Either the lawmakers are out of step with the actual negotiating strategy, or the NYT report is inaccurate. This contradiction is itself significant and may reflect internal debate within Iran's system. The approaching talks involve not just Iran and the United States, but a broader constellation of actors with different interests. China affirms Iran's nuclear rights and warns against force. Lavrov emphasized the high risks of escalation. Russia keeps its uranium offer open. Egypt warns against external intervention. Reuters reported Saudi Arabia and the UAE have refused airspace and territory for strikes. Each of these positions constrains or enables different outcomes. Chinese and Russian diplomatic support strengthens Iran's position at the table. Regional refusals to facilitate military action limit U.S. operational options. Egypt's warning adds another voice to the pro-diplomacy chorus. The United States arrives at talks with massive military assets deployed in the region, but facing regional resistance to their use. Iran arrives with stated red lines but potentially more flexibility than publicly acknowledged if the disputed NYT report has any validity. The gap between stated positions remains wide. Rubio said any deal must cover missiles, regional proxies, the nuclear file, and human rights, according to reported remarks. Iran insists on nuclear-only discussions. Whether these positions can be reconciled is the central question. China's explicit support for Iran's nuclear rights, stated directly to Iran's deputy foreign minister, provides Tehran with diplomatic backing from a major power. This affects the talks in several ways. First, it signals to Iran that it is not isolated. Beijing's support means that any U.S. attempt to frame Iran as a pariah state faces pushback from the world's second-largest economy. This may strengthen Iran's confidence in maintaining its positions. Second, it signals to Washington that excessive pressure may face international resistance. China's warning against sanctions and force suggests that escalation beyond diplomacy would meet Chinese opposition in international forums. Third, it reminds both sides that the outcome affects more than just Washington and Tehran. Chinese economic interest in the region, including energy security and trade partnerships, mean that Beijing has a stake in the result and will remain engaged regardless of what the two principals decide. The combination of Chinese diplomatic support and Russian mediation offers positions Tehran within a multipolar framework rather than a U.S.-dominated one. This is the broader strategic context in which the Oman talks occur. Russia occupies a unique position in the current dynamics. Moscow keeps its uranium custody offer on the table while simultaneously positioning itself as a diplomatic facilitator rather than a party imposing terms. The offer to host Iran's enriched uranium provides a potential face-saving mechanism for all parties. Iran could reduce its stockpile without transferring material to a Western-aligned country. The U.S. could point to reduced enrichment levels. Russia could claim a constructive role. However, Iran's Khamenei advisor has publicly stated there is no reason to transfer uranium abroad, and Ali Bagheri at the Supreme National Security Council said Iran has no intention of transferring enriched uranium abroad, according to Iranian state-linked reporting. The gap between Russia keeping the offer open and Iran publicly rejecting transfer creates ambiguity. Whether this represents a genuine disagreement between partners or a coordinated dynamic, with Russia offering what Iran publicly declines, cannot be determined from the available statements. The Khamenei advisor's repeated use of the word price reveals Iran's approach to the negotiations. Iran is not offering unilateral concessions. Every step it takes, whether diluting uranium or engaging in talks, is framed as requiring reciprocal action from the United States. You, the United States, must pay a price in return for this, the advisor said, according to the reporting. This comes with a price, and that price must be fully paid, he said, about dilution. The language is explicitly transactional. What constitutes the price has not been fully specified in the available reporting, but the framework suggests Iran expects sanctions relief, security guarantees, or other concessions in exchange for any nuclear steps it takes. This transactional approach differs from the U.S. framing, which tends to position Iranian nuclear restraint as an obligation rather than a concession deserving compensation. The fundamental disagreement over whether Iran's nuclear activities are legitimate rights or violations shapes everything about the negotiations. The contradiction between the NYT report, that Iran agreed to discuss missiles and militant groups, and the categorical Iranian denials represents perhaps the most important unresolved question heading into the talks. If the NYT report is accurate, Iran has signaled private flexibility while maintaining public rigidity. This would be standard diplomatic practice, maintaining leverage by not publicly conceding before talks begin while signaling willingness to engage on difficult topics. If the Iranian denials are accurate, the NYT report may represent either US-sourced information designed to create expectations, wishful thinking by officials briefing journalists, or mischaracterization of what Iran actually communicated. The truth may emerge only during the talks themselves, or may never be publicly confirmed. Diplomatic negotiations often involve private flexibility that is never officially acknowledged. The gap between public positions and private discussions is where agreements are actually made or missed. The military and diplomatic tracks continue running simultaneously. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remains in the region. THAAD and Patriot systems are reportedly being deployed. Iran has shown underground missile facilities, and its officials have used more aggressive language about doctrine. The Wall Street Journal reports U.S. officials say more air defenses are needed before any strike to protect bases and partners. This reporting suggests planning continues regardless of diplomatic developments. Iran's missile base footage, its drone and naval activities, and its officials' statements all serve deterrence purposes during this period. China's diplomatic backing and Russia's uranium offers serve diplomatic purposes. All of these elements exist simultaneously. The question is, which track determines the outcome? If diplomacy succeeds, the military preparations become leverage that supported a peaceful resolution. If diplomacy fails, they become the infrastructure for conflict. The same assets serve both purposes until the moment of decision. China has affirmed Iran's right to peaceful nuclear energy use, which is in line with international non-proliferation agreements, and warned against force, according to reporting on the diplomatic meeting in Beijing. Lavrov emphasized the high risks of escalation between the US and Iran, warning of dangers waiting to be triggered. Moscow confirmed its uranium custody offer remains open, but Russia has stated the decision remains with Tehran, and the outcome is yet to be determined. An advisor to Iran's supreme leader stressed the country's position on uranium, suggesting it could dilute rather than transfer the material, with a price that must be fully paid. Iran has repeatedly stated it does not seek nuclear weapons, but this claim remains contentious among international actors. An advisor to Khamenei stated that Iran sees any US strike as involving Israel, suggesting joint retaliation. Senior Iranian lawmakers called enrichment, missiles, and regional alliances non-negotiable red lines. The NYT reported Iran agreed to discuss missiles and militant groups, a claim Iranian officials categorically denied. The truth of this claim remains unclear as reports diverge from Iran's public position. Talks in Oman are expected to focus on nuclear issues, with both sides having made what reports describe as concessions on format and scope. China backs diplomacy. Lavrov emphasizes high escalation risk. Iran signals deterrence while offering conditional flexibility. The United States maintains military pressure while saying it prefers talks. The Oman meeting, whenever it occurs and whatever its actual scope, will test whether any of these positions can bend